You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
I want to welcome back our good friend, who is the Senior Vice President with the Institute of Energy Research, Dan Kish, who frequents our program, and we've had some wonderful discussions. Dan, it's great to have you back, and we have a long list today, but we'll try our best to get through it.
Well, thanks. Hi, Brett. Hi, John.
So, Dan, just real quick, and I know it's not for a lengthy discussion, but I did come across an article on your website. Of course, you go to instituteforenergyresearch.org to check this out, and it's entitled, Russia Uses Devious Means to Rid the U.S. of Domestic Oil and Gas. Essentially, this is talking about the possibility and the appearance that Russia has been funding environmental groups in the United States who are against fossil fuel production and, of course, most significantly, hydraulic fracturing, things of that nature. So it's interesting story and an interesting thought to really keep in the back of your mind.
It is. It sure is. And I'd leave it up to people to read. And it's actually a mention of a study that was done, or a report by the Environmental Policy Alliance that attempts to track down some of this money. This has been something that's been alleged for a very, very long time. I would add, over a number of years, it was always alleged that also that many OPEC members were assisting through backdoor money to groups opposed to energy development in the U.S. That hasn't been. That's not part of this, and that hasn't been mentioned recently, but I know that's been an allegation for many decades, as a matter of fact.
Well, it seems to me, Dan, that a lot of presidential libraries and things of that nature get built by large donations from people who come from the Middle East, so I think that isn't too hard if we really wanted to. And I'm pointing the finger at not just one particular side of the aisle, by the way.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's a lot of times there were lots and lots of allegations about exactly what. But if you think about it, I mean, this is it's not a lot of money. It doesn't take a huge amount of money in the general scheme of things for people to fund organizations that are that share some of the. They may not be friends or even knowing allies, but the ends are the same. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we saw it with the Verona papers after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, John.
Dan, I was just starting to make the point before you came on that we transitioned from the Ukrainian crisis, but you can't remove that from the energy crisis because, first off, if it wasn't for fossil fuel-based economic power, Russia wouldn't have the capacity to rebuild the military or do any of the pressure, put any of the pressure they are in Europe. But as well, the fact that Europe has spent so much, even with everything that's going on, and to me, again, energy is the clear underpinning that enabled Russia to go into Ukraine in the first place, and also virtually guarantees Putin that despite whatever pomp and circumstances might come from Europe, that Europe isn't going to war with Russia because Russia could turn their lights out. And with that all as a backdrop, we still hear both the President and Merkel talking about how the biggest threat to the world is still that big evil thing called we might have too much CO2 being eaten by our trees. So how do you see that having played into this? And do you think at some point these tyrants, including Iran, are going to become a wake-up call to the masses who have to get tired of consuming this nonsense?
Yeah, John. I've always been sort of amazed, and especially amazed with it. Always seems from my perch, I'll grant that it's tends to focus on energy, but I've always been a bit surprised that people don't take more seriously the energy issue when it comes to. It's about the only thing that people will go to war for, because essentially it is the essential piece of modern life, and it you cannot operate an economy of any size or power without it. It is absolutely essential as oxygen to economic and sovereign life for nations, and whether certainly we saw it undergird a huge amount of World War II, whether it was the Japanese trying to find supplies of oil throughout the Dutch West Indies, or Hitler turning his coal supplies into liquid fuels so that he could mount his aggression, or you name it. This has been the case for a long, long time, and which always astounds me, because you can lessen the impact that other people have around the world if you simply if you know that we've got the kind of supplies that we have here in the United States, huge amounts of hydrocarbons of all kind, and then for the president to say we're not going to use these going forward, which is essentially what he's saying with his global warming fetish, is it puts us in a situation where we're basically ignoring one of the largest strengths that we have, which is our tremendous supplies, and to such an extent that he even turns his nose up at Canadian supplies of oil, which are second or third largest proven supplies in the world, going forward, because some Hollywood actresses get arrested in front of the White House, and because he has some people who fund campaigns of friends of his who have a lot of say on that, like Tom Steyer.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Well, Dan, you alluded to a couple of these topics. Well, John did as well. So I'm going to throw a couple questions out here for you, and I'll let you answer them in whichever order you prefer. But overall, we've seen, it's roughly about a 60% drop in oil since, I guess, around June, and that is translated to a price at the pump that we're more accustomed to. It's still high, in the course of history, but I'll take it over nearly $4 gas. But so the question there is this good or bad for the economy overall? And then on a secondary question, do you think that we found the bottom or near bottom of this drop? And do you think this is just perhaps a short-term correction, or shall we expect this to start working its way back upward now? And then externally from those questions would be, are there foreign entities that you think are having an impact on the price of oil right now? And is it possible that the prices are being dropped purposely to help deal with, in some manner, as a matter of foreign policy, some of the things that are going on, whether you look at Iran or Russia or Ukraine, or we could go on and on and on and on. But so I'll give you all that, and I'll let you handle it however you'd prefer.
Okay. Well, I think I think lower prices for energy are always a good thing, and I think Americans are, breathing a sigh of relief that the recent very high prices that we've seen have been tempered, and they're being able to keep more of that. Now, politicians are going to reach right out and try to grab that. That's another story entirely, so watch that. But I just can't help but think that lower prices for energy helps generally the economy across the board. It hits some particular stocks hard. It hits some regions hard, namely those regions that were enjoying huge benefits in terms of employment and investment and the like when the price was much higher, and therefore, this miracle-free economy that we have when it's allowed to operate fills a void, i.e., not enough supply to meet the demand with increased supply, and that means the cost balance, and that's what was happening. So we had all this activity around the country chasing after oil wherever they could get their hands on it, investing in huge amounts. We all heard the stories about employment in North Dakota and the like, and now that's tempered a bit because supply has caught up with demand, or here and abroad. And in terms of the international, yeah, I mean, some members, most notably the Saudis, have decided that they're not going to reduce pumping. Some people allege that it's to try to starve out fracking in the United States, North America, and the rest. Others have alleged that it has more to do with their ongoing dislike of both Russia and Iran, and the fact that because prices are lower, both of those nations are hurt. I don't know what the answer is, but again, if there's one thing that makes the world go round, it's energy, and it's just a damn shame, if you pardon my French, that our own government doesn't recognize that and use that to put it to use as a strategic national asset, and instead seeks to do just the opposite with it. And as far as price going up or down, I think it's still too volatile to figure out exactly where that's going. And we're going to have to see, how the economies around the world are reacting to this. We're still increasing production, even though we're reducing the amount of rigs on a weekly basis because of some, built-in energy that is working its way through the system. So I don't think we've seen. We will continue to see an uptick in production through about half of this year, and then I think we'll see a supply response as a result of reduced activity.
But Dan, I'm still laughing inside because I almost emptied my bottle of water through my nose with your global warming fetish comment before. But I have to tell you, I'm glad you spoke to the strategic national asset aspect of this, because when you look at the entirety of the equation, it's very rare, but energy is one of those things that it does drive everything. It's extremely important for foreign policy. It's extremely important for economics, both from a foreign trade as well as either a catalyst or an anchor on economic growth. It absolutely is a national security asset, as you pointed out, with both Germany and Japan in World War II. Both had many advantages that we were able to stifle because we were able to cut off supplies of, look at how many Panzer tanks, which were far superior to our tanks, had to stop simply because they ran out of gas. And it's pretty hard for a dozen infantrymen to pick up a 60,000-pound tank and move it. So when you look at the importance of this, I wanted to move back to the land grab aspects of this, because there is, in my opinion, you look at what the recent decision that the president made regarding Alaska, and while I, like most conservatives that I know, am a big fan of the environment, I also think we have to have a balanced approach, because nothing like being weak and losing a war to understand how devastating the environment would really look. So if you could, give us a sense of what is your opinion on both the message being sent to our enemies, namely Russia and Iran, as well as the net negative potential effect on our national security via energy independence by that decision, and then if you want to throw in commentary on the pipeline as well, how relevant that is in comparison.
Well, my general take about the message that he's sending is that I'll just be blunt about it. I think the president's actions, regardless of his rhetoric about alternative energy sources and the like, I think most people around the world who are serious, and I consider Putin and other people to be fairly serious players, that they think that's a joke, and that when they read between the lines and see what his predisposition is towards the real stuff that the world runs on and will run on for many, many decades to come, that he is unilaterally disarming the United States. And, we're not a threat. We're going to be a weaker player in this if I have anything to say about it. And I think that's the message, that's the only message they can take from that, which disturbs me greatly. But let's see, what did I miss there, John? The pipeline, obviously, I think the Wall Street Journal had perhaps the best editorial in the wake of his declaration that he wanted to stop ANWR from any kind of activity from coming into play in terms of ANWR, because and what they correctly put their finger on is this is much bigger than ANWR. ANWR is an essential part of keeping the Trans-Alaska Pipeline open. The pipeline's capacity is 2.1 million barrels a day. It's currently running at 500,000 barrels a day, which means, by way of comparison, the underutilized or the unutilized capacity of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, which would be used if we had sufficient access to energy to put into it, is twice the amount of the Keystone XL, roughly. The Keystone's somewhere in the range of 830. You double that, you're in the 1600 range. That's about how much we are not putting through the pipeline that we could if we had access to ANWR and the very sizable offshore. Basically, by saying no to ANWR and by putting his boot on the neck of any possibility of producing oil in the offshore in Alaska, what you're doing is consigning tens of billions of barrels of oil that could be going down that pipeline, and you're also speeding the day when the pipeline itself will shut down. This is probably one of the most important energy links in terms of national security for the United States that we have. 2 million barrels a day is an enormous potential conduit of energy. It's good for our balance of trade. It's good for, you name it, across the board. But without that pipeline, if the pipeline can't make it to a time when we do discover further supplies on the slope and it has to be taken down, it sequesters all of that oil and indeed the huge quantities of natural gas on the North Slope in the ground, and that is consistent with the green left, which is the driving force and the brains behind the president's entire energy approach.
That's pretty unbelievable when you look at that. I'm sorry, I'm like just thinking to myself, all the other policies domestic-wise that this president has enacted, it's almost like he's trying to reenact what has been so painful to all the European economies. And you're absolutely right. I mean, this country never would have developed into the nation it was without the resource of energy, whether it be oil, coal, or whatnot. And again, John and I both peruse the Institute for Energy Research's website so often, and we constantly come across articles talking about more solar panel companies or whatnot who are going out of business. They're not getting more grants. It's a failed model, bad batteries, or whatever it is. And again, I just want to make a clarifying statement here, and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think any of us would say that we would rule out any form of energy. It's just that you have to do what makes sense, and that means that you don't get rid of cheap, plentiful, good supplies of energy for things that are much more expensive, have many other issues, and are not sustainable. And John alluded to the article of the UK where, you have all these solar, you have all these wind farms and things like that, but is wind really keeping them going?
Yeah. No, I mean, here's the. Listen, I have no. If tomorrow they announce some breakthrough that said that solar and wind will solve all of our energy, would give us boundless new energy supplies at a cost that comes in lower than existing sources, and that when we scaled it up in order to run our country and economic growth, it would be sufficient to do so, I'd jump up and down, I think, just like you guys do. It's not that we have any problem per se with it. It's that once you look at it up close and personal, the only reason they're building these things is because the government is either forcing them to by making utilities buy the electricity from these sources. They wouldn't do this willingly because it doesn't make any economic sense. So the government steps in, puts its thumb on the scale and says you must buy it. That comes from a lot of state regulations. They just fired up a new huge photovoltaic wind or solar farm out in California in the desert on government land today. Flip the switch, and it works. I mean, we can make electricity by burning human bodies, but is that what we want to do? And is that sustainable? Is that something we want to run our economy on? And the point of all this is that you cannot run an economy that is the size and the breadth with all the potential and take care of Americans' rightful desire to remain number one in the world based on the sorts of alternative energy that we have today. And the fact that the president dedicates so much of his time and effort to it is in fact a lie to the American public. And in many cases, because of the things that it does to the grid and because of the things that it does to the economics of electricity and all the rest, it's a sort of a hidden. People like alternative energy. That's not the issue. It isn't that it doesn't work or that it's that you can't. We would not be the United States running on the forms of energy that they seem to only like. And for those sources of energy, which we've been thankfully blessed with, some of the largest prodigious supplies in the world, whether that's coal, where our supplies are larger than the next four countries combined, we take that off the table. We take our oil supplies off Alaska off the table. We take most of our OCS supplies off the table with his new plan. And then they try to regulate, increase the government's take or taxes on all of the other sources. In essence, they're trying to kill these sources. No other country in the world would do what we're doing willingly. At least with the Europeans, part of the reason they're doing it is because they don't have apparent supplies of alternative of the sorts of supplies of energy that we have. The United States has no, and we have no excuse.
And to that statement you just made regarding Europe, they should actually be seeking more nuclear energy and not shutting it down. Yes. And we're very short on time, but I just wanted to say this. We did the Grammys were last night, and I'm sure a lot of these Hollywood, or star-like people who are constantly speaking up against, energy resources. I'm sure as they got on their planes to go to the Grammys from wherever they were, they didn't get on a solar run or wind-powered plane. Okay?
Yeah.
So,
that's a certainty.
And their homes, by the way, I wonder what they're being run on. But anyway, Dan, thank you as always. Folks, you can go to the instituteforenergyresearch.org to find out more about the different things that they're working on. And we'll speak to you again soon. Have a great afternoon, Dan. Dan Kish, Senior Vice President of Policy, Institute of Energy Research. Take care, Dan.